The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone. Hi. You guys have any questions for me? Alright. So actually let's talk about something, we did one last example using HTTP. So let's see what is HTTP. Then I gave you a link to read about HTTP. So HTTP is one of the protocols to transfer the data. HTTP is one of the protocols to transfer the data from one machine to another machine. Right. It's hypertext transfer protocol. It's an application level protocol for distributed collaborative hypermedia information systems. Now you are asked me to read about this, right? So here I just don't want to get into deeper. I'll just say what is the basic features of HTTP. It is media independent. It is stateless, connectionless. Now one need to understand what do you mean by connectionless and what do you mean by stateless. What exactly one meant by connectionless and stateless. So what happens is, what exactly meant by connectionless and stateless. And you see here, there is one more thing called HTTP methods. Get, post, head, delete, options, trace, put. So what is this all about? Right? What is the significance of these things? Then you have some status codes. It starts with one, it starts with 2, it starts with 3, it starts with 4, it starts with 5. So you got what do you mean by 100, what do you mean by 101, what it mean by 200, 201, 202, 400, bad equals 404, page not found. So these are all related to what? HTTP protocol. Because that is the protocol we use. So what is the difference between the generic servlet and HTTP servlet? What is the difference between the generic servlet and HTTP servlet? Okay. So your generic servlet can attend a request submitted by any protocol. The generic servlet can attend a request submitted by any protocol. Whereas HTTP servlet can attend only requests submitted by HTTP protocol. So what is the difference between the generic servlet and HTTP servlet is, your HTTP servlet is only meant for HTTP protocol requests. Whereas your generic servlet is to handle any kind of protocol request. It's for handle any kind of protocol request. Your HTTP servlet is only specific to the HTTP protocol request. Now, what I'm going to discuss is, I was submitting the data. So what do I get? Do I get only data from the client or do I get anything more? Do I get only data from the client or do I get more? So let's see that. In 3.0, web.xml is optional. I just created a HTML. Then I'm creating a form. I have an input field. No, sorry. So this is my HTML page. When I click on the submit button, it connects to calculate servlet. Then I'm creating a servlet named as calculate servlet. Extending HTTP servlet. I still go with the doGet method. Then within this doGet method, so you can find the result. Then you can obtain a print writer. Then you can print it with the help of the print writer object. This is a simple example. This is a simple example using HTTP protocol. Now let's talk about HTTP protocol here. Let's read about this. Now what is this? Your HTTP client, that is browser, initiates an HTTP request, and after a request is made, the client disconnects from the server and waits for the response. The server processes the request and re-establish the connection with the client to send the response back. I reiterate the point. The HTTP client, that is browser, initiates an HTTP request. And after a request is made, the client disconnects from the server and waits for a response. Now what your server will do? The server process the request and re-establish the connection with the client and to get the response back. Re-establish the connection with the client to send the response back. So how this will happen? Because according to the statement, when I click on the submit button, a request is submitted to the server and it gets disconnected. Now your servlet, after processing the request, it reconnects back to the client. So how it will get reconnected to the client? How it will get reconnected to the client? Am I receiving the address of the client? So in order to understand them, we need to understand this. You have a HTTP servlet request. I'll get on it. Request.getHeader. Request.getHeader names. Request.getHeader names. Now what is the return type of this? Let's see. Request.getHeader name. It returns an enumeration of type string. This is also from java.utility. So first let me display the header names. So we need to specify the response type. So we are specifying that response is text or HTML. See, there are headers: accept, referrer, accept language, accept encoding, user agent, the host name, the connection. So these are all the header names actually. For every header there will be a lot of values. How do I get that? Request dot get headers and you pass what? Header name. So when you pass header name, it will give you what? Header values of that name. So what are the values allowed for that name? It will return. Now let me try to print the values. Oh, I'm doing a SISO. It's not SISO. It should be out.println. What all what all it accepts? It accepts any kind of things. It accepts applications. It accepts images. It accepts GIF. It accepts star by star. It accepts any kind of request. So header is a accept. It accepts any kind of request. Referrer, that is who is making a request. What is the language option it accepts? English United States. What is the processor? AMD 64. The values GZIP, B flag, value Mozilla Firefox. From where the request is coming? Is the connection alive? So here what it says, your HTTP protocol is connectionless. When you submit a request to the server, after submitting a request to the server, you get disconnected. Then after server process the request, when the response is ready, it re-establishes the connection to give the response. But how it will re-establish the connection? Because when you submit a request, you not only send the data which is entered in the HTML. When you submit a request, you not only submit the data which is entered in the HTML, along with the data in the HTML, you submit a lot of other information called as header information. Now with the help of those header informations, when the response is ready, the server will be able to re-establish the connection and give the response back to the respective client. I hope this is clear. Right? So that is the advantage of your HTTP protocol. So why it should need to get disconnected? I'll tell you. You submit a request to the server and you are waiting, holding the connection. What happens? You submit a request to the server and we are not sure how long it's going to take for response. When we are not sure how long it's going to take to wait for response, then why we should wait? Let's get disconnected and we start working on different things. And whenever the response is ready, it gives you the response back. So what is happening? Here the performance improves. Well, how it improves? Because you are not waiting for the request. You are not waiting for somebody. You just submitted a request and goes back and continue with the rest of the work. When the response is ready, the request is given back. When the response is ready, it re-establishes the connection with the client and gives the response. And that's how it makes the performance of your application much better rather than holding the connection and waiting for the response. That is the advantage of your HTTP protocol. So I spoke about the headers and I spoke about the connectionless feature of the HTTP protocol. Now what next? Now I was reading the data on this servlet and I was reading the data on the servlet. I was calculating the result and I was also printing the output on the same servlet. I'm also printing the output on the same servlet. Instead of printing the output on the same servlet, can I call another servlet to print the output? Shall I call another servlet to print the output? I'm calling another servlet to print the output. What is the servlet name? Output servlet. Now, what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to print output using a different servlet program. I'm trying to print the output using a different servlet program. Now here we go. I'm trying to print the output using a different servlet program. Right. I'm trying to print the output using a different servlet program. But how this is possible? Will I be able to say this? Let's see. I need the result, right? I need the result. If you go back, am I transferring the result to the next page? No. So what I do is, before I call the next page, let me store that output in a different variable. Look at this. I'm storing that output into a variable. What I'm trying to do here, storing the result in request scope. I'm storing the result in which scope? The request scope. I'm storing the result in which scope? The request scope. I'm storing the result into the request scope, then I'm calling the output servlet. Then what I do on the output servlet is, using the request object, I try to get that attribute which was in the request scope. I stored an attribute in the request scope. I stored an attribute in the request scope and I'm trying to fetch that. And I'm trying to fetch that attribute value from the request scope. Let's see. What happened? Null pointer exception in the output servlet. Right? Why in the output servlet? Line number 18. So this is the line number which is giving me an error. Why? The reason is, when you say request.getAttribute, it is giving you null. Why it is giving me null? Because when I did here request.setAttribute, I am setting the result with the alias name result, storing the result in the request scope. The first argument is alias name, and using that alias name, I am trying to get the value in the output servlet. But what is happening? It's giving me a null pointer exception. It is giving me what? Null pointer exception. But why it is giving me a null pointer exception? Because there is a value in the result. The reason being, when you do response.send redirect, it throws a null pointer exception in output servlet. It throws null pointer exception in output servlet. What is the reason for throwing a null pointer? When we redirect, the current request object is killed and a new request object is created. and a new request object is created. This is very important question with respect to interviews also. So what happens when you do redirect? The current request object which is holding the result is destroyed, and a new request object is created. And if a new request object is created, and a new request object is created, in new request object there is no result attribute. That is a problem actually. That is a problem for the exception. It is a problem for the exception. Then I give you another solution to you. I will give you another solution. Request dot set attribute. Now don't say redirect. Instead say request dot get request dispatcher. Request dot get request dispatcher dot forward request and response. So you what are you doing here? You are forwarding the request and response of, what are you doing here? You are forwarding the request and response object of calculate servlet to output servlet. Since you are forwarding the current request object to the next servlet, you can get the data now. Now you see here, the result is 4. How come? Because you forwarded the calculate servlet request and response objects to the output servlet. Now in this case, the output servlet is able to read the value from result. So you don't see any exception. Then you have one more concept also. Okay. Now there is something called get servlet context. Get request dispatcher. Get servlet context dot get request dispatcher, forward the request and response. Now let me run this. You see the same result. You have an exception. The reason is, when we use servlet context dot get request dispatcher, you are supposed to specify the absolute path. You are supposed to specify the absolute path. Now you see the output. You are supposed to specify the absolute path. Now what is the difference between the request dot get request dispatcher and context dot get request dispatcher? Difference between request dot get request dispatcher dot forward, it takes a string, take the servlet request. This is one method, and the other method is get servlet context. What is the difference between the both? Latter uses the absolute path, complete address, whereas former uses the relative path. What do you mean by this? Means when we use request dot get request dispatcher, the output servlet and calculate servlet should be from the same location. I repeat the point. When we use request dot get request dispatcher, output servlet and calculate servlet should be from the same location. That's the reason I just specify the servlet name, and it will search in the same address where you find the calculate servlet. Whereas when you say get servlet context dot get request dispatcher, you have to specify the complete address, because the output servlet may or may not be in the same location as the calculate servlet. Okay, the calculate servlet and output servlet, if they are not in the same location, then you use context dot get request dispatcher to specify the complete address. That is the difference between the request dot get request dispatcher and servlet dot get request context dot get request dispatcher. Now there is one more concept. Request dot set attribute, now after here get servlet context dot get name or dispatcher dot forward request response. Now here what you do, output servlet. It gives you the result, but I'll tell you what is the difference between this. Now what do you mean by get name or dispatcher? Normally for request dot get request dispatcher, and get servlet context dot get request dispatcher, we use URL pattern. But for get servlet context dot get name or dispatcher, get servlet context as a name or dispatcher, we use servlet name. That is, if you look at your XML application, web.xml, what did I say? There is a mapping happening here, right? You have a servlet tag and you have a servlet mapping. Now you use URL pattern for request dot get request dispatcher and context dot get request dispatcher, but you use servlet name. So servlet name for what? You will be using the servlet name when we use name or dispatcher. When we use name or dispatcher, it is be using the servlet name. We use servlet name for name or dispatcher. Yep. Any questions so far? I think somebody got it. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't have a look at it. I'll just go back to it. Either you guys got any questions with respect to this dispatcher? You guys got any questions with respect to the dispatcher? So there are three dispatchers, there is one redirect. When you redirect, the existing request object will be killed and a new request object will be created. When you say redirect, when you say dispatcher, the same request object will be forwarded. So you have a request dot get request dispatcher, you have a context dot get dispatcher, then you have a context dot get name dispatcher. So if no questions, then what is the significance of this dispatching? You are forwarding the results of the current page to the next page. Now then I was asking for the header information, so let me do that. It's simple part. What we need to do is what is this headers? What is this headers all about? Then I found that there is a protocol called HTTP protocol. Now that HTTP protocol is smart. It submits the request with the server. After submitting the request to the server, it will be no longer connected. It gets disconnected. So the job of the HTTP protocol is to submit the request. After submitting the request, it is not waiting. It is going back and continuing its own work. Then there is a request which is submitted to the server. The server processes the request, and when the response is ready, what your server will do? Server will re-establish the connection with the client. But how server will be able to re-establish the connection with the client? Because there are so many people connecting to the server. How your server will be remembering you? So when I submit a request, I'm not only passing the data. When I submit a request, I'm not only passing the data, I'm also passing a lot of header information. So there are some header names. Actually, it's like a key values. You know map, right? Key values. So when you say header names, all the header keys will be obtained. I think enumeration is like your iterator. In iterator, you have what? Has, next, and next. Enumeration is the old version, java.util. It comes from the beginning. Your iterator is added in JDK 1.5. But before 1.5, I used to make use of the enumeration only. So what I'm doing, has more elements will tell me whether there are more keys or not. If yes, get the key, and you are printing the key. For every corresponding key, there can be multiple values. So you said request.get headers, then you are passing a key. And for that key, there can be multiple values. You get those multiple values here. And those values you are printing next. So for every key, there is a values. So let me go back and run the same output again. I won't be dispatching. There is a name, there are values to it. There is a name, there are values to it. There is a name, there are values to it. So these names are representing the keys. So it says that the server accepts this kind of request. The request is coming from which page? Right? What is the language the client has selected? What is the processor the client is using? Alright, what is the browser the client is using? So everything, all the information will be given. So it's not only the data which is entered by the client, it's more than the data. So from where you are getting connected, from where you are trying to make a request, every information is being captured by your server. And that using that information, it will re-establish the connection and give the response back to the client. And what is the advantage of connectionless protocol? The performance of this is very quick. The performance is quick. Now coming back here, you guys might have asked me a question here. What is happening is, whenever I'm doing a redirect or dispatch, whenever I'm doing a redirect and dispatch, the output is not getting printed. Header information is not getting displayed, right? So I go back and enable the last. What happened to the header information? Why it is not getting printed? Why it is not getting printed? Because why it is not okay? This is still the previous one. It's getting printed. The result is 4. The reason is you are printing this output. You are printing this header information. There is no doubt about that. But after printing, before it is visible, you are calling a dispatcher servlet. Or that is, you are calling dispatcher. That is, you are calling the output servlet. So what happens? As soon as you see it starts printing and you call dispatcher and you are calling output servlet. So what happens? The control transfers from calculate servlet to the output servlet. So only the output of the output servlet will be displayed. But whatever we printed in the calculate servlet, whatever I try to print it in the calculate servlet, that is not visible to us, because before it gets visible to us, you are transferring it to what? Dispatcher. You are calling a dispatcher, and that gives the control to the output servlet. And in the output servlet, what do you have? You have only a message called result, and that is being visible to us. I hope it's clear for you what I was trying to say. Yeah. Any questions?
Hi,
Yeah. Hi.
I had a question about the dispatcher method. The get named dispatcher takes a name and the other two takes a URL.
URL.
Right. So, however, in the request.get request dispatcher, it didn't seem like a URL. It just looked like a name.
Oh, because as I said, it takes a absolute path. Sorry, it takes a relative path. Now
Okay.
here, this doesn't mean it's a URL. This forward slash means the root address. So this is like a complete address. When I say forward slash, it's like a root address. The parent address is also concatenated. Actually, this forward slash has a different meaning in Unix. You say forward slash, that is, take the parent address, and to that parent address add this output servlet. Okay. So this is your complete address. Now here I can suppose if I have a folder and in the folder I have an output servlet. This is gonna be my address.
Okay.
So this is possible for context.getRequestDispatcher. That is, you can specify the complete address in the context.getRequestDispatcher. Whereas when you say request.getRequestDispatcher, it's a URL, but here I'm not putting a forward slash. The reason being, it will start looking for the output servlet in the same location where you have the calculate servlet. So you don't need to specify the address, right?
Okay.
So it's a relative URL. This kind of URL is called as relative URL, where it will start searching for the output servlet in the same location where do you have your calculate servlet.
Okay.
Whereas when you say servlet context.getRequestDispatcher, you are specifying the complete address where it has to search for.
Okay.
This is your absolute path. Alright?
Okay. Thank you.
So your assumption of if there is a forward slash, it's a URL pattern, that is not correct. Your assumption of URL pattern starts with a forward slash is incorrect. Actually, to differentiate in the web.xml, we do that. But assumption of URL pattern starting with the forward slash is not correct.
Okay.
I think that was the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, hi Arun. So in that using redirect, is there any way to we can pass the value, because you said the actual the object will kill, the new will be produced when we are redirecting that method, right?
Yes, perfect. This is also
So
one of the popular interview questions too. So we all know that redirect will kill the existing object and creates a new object. Is there
yeah,
any way I can obtain the data?
yeah.
Alright, so yes, you have an option. The option I'll discuss here. So using redirect, if you still want to obtain that value, you see here output servlet,
Yeah.
question mark.
Okay.
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 Then in the output servlet, you won't be saying request.get attribute. You have a different approach to it. Uh,
Excuse me.
oh, I'm sorry. You have to use it
Okay.
to get that value. You did redirect, but still you are able to get that value because when you are redirecting in the URL, you are passing this.
Okay. And
Little
one more
bit-
question.
Go.
Yeah, in that servlet name, so it has to be unique because we are not specifying any path, the particular path there. So the servlet name cannot be duplicate, or how it will work.
It actually servlet name, right? Let's go back to the
Yeah.
web.xml.
Okay.
So if you try to see this, look at this. Do you see the red color mark?
Yeah.
Duplicate unique value. So you cannot have two servlets with the same servlet name.
Okay.
Clear?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Next, what the other one is, I can also demonstrate one more concept here. You're trying to divide the numbers, right? You're trying to divide the numbers. Now, what happens if I'm passing second argument as a 0? What happens if I pass second argument as a 0? So this is not a checked exception. It's an unchecked exception. So if it is a checked exception, you can handle it because your compiler forces you to handle the checked exception. But since it is an unchecked exception, what are you going to do? Since it is an unchecked exception, what we going to do for it? Right? So what we need to do is, we have a solution to this also. But I need to write the web.xml. You guys observe here. In the web.xml, in the web.xml, you can write something like this. error page, then the exception type and the location. So I'll say exception type is what? Java dot lang dot arithmetic exception, and location, let's say error servlet. Let me create a servlet called error servlet. Now here I'll create one more servlet, calling it as error servlet. Calling it as error servlet. Calling it as error servlet. Now within this error servlet, what I will be doing is, you guys need to focus. This servlet is called on what? Exception, right? This servlet is called on what? On exception. So since the servlet is called on exception, so you have some built-in attributes. Java X dot servlet dot error dot Java X dot exception. Since it returns object, your get attribute method is your request dot get attribute method returns java dot lang dot object. So you're typecasting it to exception because I know it's an exception object. Then what next? Request dot get attribute java x dot servlet dot error dot message, and this gives a object, convert it to string. Request dot get attribute java x dot servlet dot error dot status underscore code. Integer start. Then here we go. Print writer out equal to response dot get writer and out dot println. So what all you have? Got your exception type, exception, println, got a message, to the error code, perfect. Now let me run the application. Input.html run on server. So earlier when I pass 0, it was taking me to an exception page. But now what happens? Let me do this again. The browser don't support this feature here. Let me run it on an external browser. Put 12 and 0. Exception type, exception message, 0 error code 500. Right. Error code 500. So it's clear, right? Now what happened is you can handle any kind of exception now. The unchecked exceptions, what you can do is you can simply document here. If I said arithmetic exception, I'll simply say exception. Whatever the exception it may be, whenever the exception arises, just come back to this page. Error servlet 12 and a 0. Come over. You pass. Arun, it was supposed to be a number. Okay, there is something wrong. Again, it is going back to that exception. I think we need to be specific. But it will not be the case. Not sure why are it. Okay. We should go like this only. So this is how you delegate the exceptions. In the calculate servlet, there is a possibility of exception. Then you are routing that exception to what? In the web.xml, you configured an error page, exception type. If exception type is this, it goes to the error servlet. Otherwise, let me try this arithmetic exception. Let me add one more. If it is a number format exception, let's try this. You are routing that to its error servlet. So in the web.xml, you need to configure that servlet. And what happens whenever the exception arises, it goes to the web.xml and sees that, oh, there is a servlet, and it goes to the servlet. Now understand, if I try to call the servlet directly, what happens? Look, I'm calling calculate servlet, and then in the calculate servlet there is an exception happening. Now what we can do is, why can't I call error servlet directly? What happens when I call error servlet? You get a null pointer exception. Why you get a null pointer exception? Because I said that these attributes are there, right? These attributes are only available. These attributes are only available when exception arises. The attributes are only available on exception or exception. Otherwise they give you null. Otherwise they give you null. And you end up in null pointer exception. You end up in what? Null pointer exception. So you cannot call this error servlet directly. The error servlet which you configured in the web.xml, you cannot call it directly in the address bar. Why I cannot call it? Because the implicit attributes, the attributes which I'm trying to retrieve, they are only available on exception. If exception arises, then only they are available. If no exception arises, then they are not available for us. Okay. Is this clear? The exception concept? Handling the exception in servlets? Or you guys have any other questions? You have any questions on it?
Yes, sir. If we check the null pointer exception, then it will, we can go with the servlet directly, or even we cannot do that one.
For null pointer exception?
Yeah, if we do the null pointer.
But actually null pointer exception is something, you are ending up in writing a not a proper code, right?
Okay. No, just I'm asking. So if we check the null pointer exception, then we can call the servlet directly, or even that for that also it won't work. Just I'm asking that.
Yeah, I think it is working for null pointer exception also.
Okay.
You have input dot
No, I want to call the servlet directly. I want to call that error servlet directly.
No, you cannot call error servlet directly because that is supposed to be called only on exception, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. If we give the null pointer exception in the XML also, we cannot do that, right?
No. See, the thing is, we can for null pointer exception we can call a servlet. See, suppose, okay, let me discuss that. Let me go back here. I said on null pointer exception, what I'm calling error servlet, right?
Yeah.
See, I'm directing whenever the null pointer exception arises. Whenever the null pointer exception arises, I'm calling error servlet. But first, I should ensure that there is a null pointer exception occurs. So let's do that. So here we go. On the output servlet, or not here only, right? Okay. Let's see this. Okay. Got it? So when a null pointer exception occurs in your servlet, you can direct it to what? You can direct it to this error servlet page. But why people want to call the error page directly? Who want to call error page? Nobody want to call error page, right? You want error page to be called only on some exception. But why I will be interested to call error servlet directly? Now what next? Yeah. One more stuff. What is the other one is, if you observe carefully, when I right click on the input.html and I say run on server, then I get this page, right? Now instead, I right click on the project. I'm doing a right click on the project and I say run on server. What happened? Then in the address bar, you need to add input.html. Right? So what is happening is when you right click on the HTML and you say run as, then your HTML file is being opened. But when you say right click on the project and you say run as, it's not opening the HTML file. It's rather giving you this. But what do you do normally? You don't say tutorials, you say w3schools.com, that's it. There is one page getting called directly, right? Did you type any address? Tutorialspoint.com. You get one page here by default. JavaTpoint.com. You get one page by default. So how do you get that? You have a web.xml. In the web.xml, you have a welcome file list. In the web.xml, you have a welcome file list. And in the welcome file list, you have welcome files. So you can have many welcome files. See? But how it is possible? How one can have multiple welcome files? So what exactly happens is, when you have multiple welcome files, it search for the first welcome file. If the first welcome file is not found, then it will go for the second welcome file. Now if you observe carefully, as soon as I am not doing right click on HTML, I am doing the right click on the project. Right click on the project, then I say run as, run on server. Run as, run on server. Then I click on the finish. Now this time I don't need to type input.html in the address bar. It opens input.html by default. Okay. Yeah. Oh, input.html I will type. Come actually. Right click, run as, run on server. Oh, it's not happening. So let me try this. It will keep only one welcome file. Input.html. Right click on the project, run as, run on server. Yeah, you see input.html is getting called. But it allows multiple welcome files. So the significance of that multiple welcome file is, if it doesn't find the first one, it goes to the next one. But that is not happening in this case. But that is the purpose actually. I just make a re-attempt to see. Yeah. Okay. Let me refresh it again. I want to be sure. Yes. So what is happening is, in the welcome file list, you have two welcome files. The first welcome file is not found, so it starts looking for the second welcome file. I hope you understood the advantage of welcome file tag in the welcome file list in the web.xml. Now, oh, even if, okay, if you think that, okay. In the previous case, I have written that was the problem. Alright, fine. Thanks. Now, what next? I go back to that tutorialspoint.com again to look at that learn HTTP programming. Learn HTTP. HTTP is not a programming. And in that HTTP, there was an overview, and we already spoke about the connectionless. Now, basing on that connectionless, there is something called stateless. Now, what do you mean by stateless? As I said earlier that HTTP protocol is connectionless protocol. Now, what do you mean by connectionless protocol? It submits a request and it don't wait. It gets disconnected. Then when your server is ready with the response, it returns the response back by re-establishing the connection. So since your HTTP protocol is connectionless, it is also stateless. Now what do you mean by stateless? I logged in, the customer logs in. A customer logs in, he navigates from one page to another page by clicking on the hyperlinks, whatever. He click on the hyperlink or he click on some, he changes the value, he changes the URL in the address bar. Whatever the means, he moves from one location to another location. But will he be tracked? Will he be tracked? Or normally you look at shopping applications. Take a lot of shopping applications, whatever you have, right? What you do? You just keep moving from one page to another page, right? So let's pick up here. So you start picking up here. Now you keep moving. You pick the product and you keep moving. So how it is maintained? I'll say quick view. Then I'll say add to cart. Select the size. It's mandatory for you. Done. So what happens is your identity is maintained across the several web pages. Your identity is maintained across the several web pages. So how is it maintained when your HTTP protocol is connectionless? Because when you make a request to the server, after making a request, it gets disconnected. Now, if that is the case, how your identity is maintained across the several web pages? Your HTTP protocol is stateless. If it is stateless, how your identity is maintained across several web pages? So there are many mechanisms of session management. Session management using cookies. I'll be discussing two of them. There are four mechanisms. The first two are of no use. So session can be maintained in servlets using the following four mechanisms. The first one is hidden field. That is, you store the user identity in a hidden field in every page. The next one is URL rewrite. If you remember, Dana asked me a question on redirect. If I want to maintain the value, how do I? So in the redirect, if I want to maintain the value, how do I? Then I gave you this example. When you are redirecting, you add the value in the URL. This is your second mechanism. First mechanism is, in every web page, you write a hidden field. When you say hidden, the field will not be visible. Now this hidden field will store the username. And through this way, you maintain the user identity across the several web pages. But it doesn't make sense, because when you do the right click and view source, you can see the HTML, right? When you do the right click and view source, you can see the HTML. Then if you put the user identity in the username, then people will be able to read it. It's not secure. Then holding it in the URL is also not secure. So people don't use this techniques to maintain the session identity. But these are the initial ones. Then you have the next concept as cookies, and there is something called as a session API. Cookies are also not secure. Why they are not secure? because they are stored into client browser. They are not stored on the server. They are stored onto the client browser, so they are not secure. So session API is the best mechanism. So we're going to discuss one after another. Now what I want to do here in this I want to have a login form. Then there will be a servlets. Then I'll demonstrate how to maintain the user identity across several web pages. I'm creating a HTML file, naming it as a login. I'm creating a HTML file, naming it as a login. Then I go with a form, and in the form I'll ask for a username and a password. I'm sorry. I go with the text field. Username. You got a password field. Then here you have a action. Let's say login server. Then I have a submit button. So when I click on this login button, it connects to login servlet. Then let me create a login servlet. I'm choosing do get method, if you observe. Now in this login servlet, I'm getting the username and the password. You got the username. You got the password. If username is equals password, then what? Else I'll give a message. Invalid user. If it is equals, I store the username as a cookie. I store the username as a cookie. Then after storing the username as a cookie, I add the cookie to the browser. Add the cookie to the browser. Why I'm doing this? Because there are so many people who logs in. And if I start maintaining them on the server, I felt it's going to be a pain on the server. So because of that reason, I added the cookie to the browser. Then after adding the cookie to the browser, then I would like to go to the next page by clicking on a hyperlink. It's done. Yes. Okay. No, I just did any logic. It has nothing to do, right? I just want to, instead of connecting to the database, check whether the username and password exist or not. I just did equals. Of course, nobody will keep the username and password equal because that is not my concern. My concern is not that, how do I validate the username and password. My concern is how do I maintain the user identity across the several web pages. So that is what I'm trying to get. So I'm just checking whether username equals password or not. If yes, then store the username in a cookie and add it to the browser. Go to the next page. Now, is that username which is stored as a cookie, will it be available for the next servlet? The username which is stored as a cookie, will it be available for the next servlet? That's something we need to find out. Will it be available for the next servlet? Let's see whether it is available for the next servlet or not. Here we go. What we do is, I'll get all the cookies which are stored on the browser. I get all the cookies which are stored on the browser. But am I interested in all? No. I'm only interested in the one user. But I cannot get one from the browser. I get all from the browser. And here I check if the name of the cookie is equals to user. If yes, if that is what you are looking at, then you don't need to continue the loop. Then you can simply say the person who logged in is user who logged in is ck of I dot get the value. It's done. So this is how you obtain the cookie value, and in the previous servlet you saw how to create a cookie value. So you obtain the value from a cookie. Simple, right? It is very easy to create a cookie and add it to the browser. Then a little bit difficulty because you need to get all the cookies and you need to search for the cookie user and get the value of it and print it or whatever you want to do with it. So here I would like to, this is all about session tracking using cookies. But there is one drawback here. The drawback is not with respect to the cookie. The drawback is if you observe the browser, what happens? When I click on this, the URL is containing the password also. The URL is containing the password also. But this doesn't make sense, right? So what we do is, instead of get method, I'll use post. By default it is get. You see, the moment I pick the method attribute, it comes with a value get. The default is get. So when you don't specify, it is get. So I'm changing it to post. Now in the login servlet, I will not be overriding the do get method. Instead I override the do post. Instead I override the do post. Let me run it again. I use get. Okay. Dot details login servlet. Okay, got it. So here you're specifying it as a post and you're calling the login servlet. Here it is a hyperlink, right? So when it is a hyperlink, what happens? It will be a get only, because hyperlinks are what? URL rewriting. Hyperlinks are what? URL rewriting. So your next servlet will have get method only, because in the login servlet you are clicking on a hyperlink. So clicking on the hyperlink is nothing but get, because URL value need to be changed. So if you see, run on server. So what is the difference between your get and the post is, for the post URL value doesn't get changed. For get URL gets changed. So if you see here, you go to the servlet without changing, okay, so servlet. But from here, when you click, the URL need to be rewritten. But if it is a post, it doesn't happen that way. So post URL value does not get changed. I mean, the data is not carried in the form of URL. Post data is not carried in the form of URL. Get data is carried in the form of URL. So from the login, you are calling a next servlet on hyperlink. So if you want to use hyperlink, the called servlet should have a doGet method only. If you want to use a hyperlink, the called servlet should have a doGet method only. So this is what the difference is between the doGet and the doPost. This is one difference. And session management using cookies. Let me quickly do the other session management. File menu, dynamic web project, session management using session API. Click on the next, pick XML and set finish. What I do is I just pick that login.html because I don't want to redo it again. I paste it here. Perfect. Then I create, as usual, login servlet. We'll go with post type. Then also have a next servlet. I'll go with doGet. Login servlet should have a doPost. Next servlet we have a doGet. It connects to login servlet. Now in the login servlet, I do the similar kind of stuff. It's up to you what condition you want to do. I just get those lines from the previous program. You get the username and the password. I give a message. Now focus here. I need to store the user identity. I'm using HTTP session. It's an interface. So when I say request.get session, it gives me an object. Now using this, I set the attribute. Now there is another scope, request scope. You already saw the request scope. Now this is the session scope. In the dispatcher examples, you saw the request scope. So far you saw two scopes. Storing value in session scope. But what is the difference between the request scope and session scope? Session scope is valid for more than one page. Whereas request scope is only for called page. So using request.getRequestDispatcher, you call a servlet, right? Only that servlet will be able to get the request value, request.getAttribute. Whereas when you say session scope, you just store it and you can obtain it anywhere. You can obtain it anywhere. You can obtain it anywhere. So I'm going to the next servlet. Now what I do on the next servlet is, it's very simple. Again you need to create a session object. You need to get the session object. Get the session. Then you need a username, right? Request.getAttribute. What is the attribute name? Username. Then it returns an object. Hey, it's not request, man. It is session. It's in the session scope, right? Session.getAttribute. What did we do here? Session.setAttribute, right? Yeah. Session.setAttribute. Now session.getAttribute. Now you need to print it. It's done. Login.html. Login servlet. Oh, the user who logged in is null. There is something wrong. Request.getSession. Session.set. Oh, what is this? Alias name. User. But what I'm trying to get here, username. That was the problem. This is how session can be tracked. Why we need to do this session tracking? Because HTTP protocol is stateless. Why it is stateless? Because it's connectionless. Since it is connectionless, it cannot maintain the data across several web pages. So it will be the responsibility of the programmer to maintain the identity across several web pages. And I can accomplish in 4 ways. Hidden field URL rewrite, but they are outdated and not secure. We use cookies if the data is need not to be secured. We use session API if there is a security involved. Yeah. Any questions on what I covered so far? No. It doesn't matter. It will be available beyond that. It has nothing to do with the page, the web page open and web page closed. If that is the case, if you look at this, I close this and I open. I don't need to log in. It means my identity is maintained still. It has nothing to do with the page open and page close. Yeah, any other question? All right. Oh, fine. That is something. If its session gets expired, if session get expires, we cannot do anything. But we can also control the session. How long the session need to be available. We can also control the session. How long the session need to be available. So if you see here, now if you think this is your logout page, then you can do what is that? We have something called invalidate. So normally we do invalidate page will be the logout page will be there, no? So on the logout page we write this snippet session.invalidate, then session gets expired. Then after that your identity will be lost. Then you need to relog in. So this is a snippet to invalidate a session. This is a snippet to invalidate the session. And for this session also there is a maximum time interval can be specified. See, max inactive interval. So you can specify how long you want to maintain it, and once it reaches beyond that, it gets expired. Means inactive in the sense we are not doing anything. We just log in and leave it. Then it maintains the tracker. Then after it maintains the counter. Then after that, it feels that if nothing is being performed on the session, then after some time it gets destroyed. And that we can specify with the help of set max interval, max inactive interval. Not only this, we also have in the XML also there will be an option. In the XML also there will be an option, session configuration, session timeout. So you can specify the timeout. After that it will be destroyed. Yeah. Any other question? All right. If no questions, what I missed out today was, yesterday I listed few topics, and from that I missed out, I couldn't complete these things today. Unit and context parameter. I'll do that tomorrow along with JDBC. So yeah, JDBC. Then there is something called filters. There is something called listeners. KDBC filters, listeners, session track. Yeah, I think these are the top concepts. And tomorrow we'll be wrapping up the servlets part. Okay. Sign in to sign out is a session only. We'll keep track of the session. There's nothing beyond that. Yes, I'll do that. Right. I'll forward the code samples. Yeah, we'll also do that sign in to sign out activity with one of the activities what we're gonna do soon. Alright guys, any other questions? Try to go through the recordings of the last day and today's class too, and let me know if you have any questions on servlet, because servlet is a very basic web component, and the good idea about the servlets is must, because without the knowledge of the servlets it is very difficult to understand JSPs and frameworks. So ensure that you read a lot of stuff regarding. Oh, you still didn't get in touch with Shiva regarding the recordings? Because normally what exactly happens is recordings will be shared with everybody. Okay. Can anyone help? How do you access the recordings? Did Shiva need to give permissions to it, or how do you do that? Dana or Ishita, can you help us? You know how one can access the recordings? But no, I share the recording every day, right? I just upload it on quickly. As soon as the class ends, I just upload the recording.
Yes, Arun, but we get the email once in 2 days only. No, I mean 2 days recording will come in one email.
Okay, 2 recordings comes in one email, not necessarily every day.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, we don't need any access key or anything. Just we click the link, we can see the recording here.
Oh, okay, fine. So this email comes from Shiva's, right?
Yeah, email comes from Shiva.
Fine, Suman. Okay, I'll ask Shiva to include you in that recording email also, right? And I also ask him to share the previous recordings with you too. Alright guys, okay, I'll check with Shiva whether he can share the recordings on day-to-day basis rather than accumulating them and sending it every 2 days. Right. Thanks everyone, catch you in the next session then.
Yeah, thank you, Arun.
Thank you.